All right, folks, it's great to see everybody. We had a request for starting today's class, which would be teaching how to say thank you, and if possible, explaining how the language is actually working when we're saying thank you. This could include, I know some of our languages include different forms for plural and singular, different forms for formal and informal. And we went through a variety of options for you can get last night. So which language gang would like to go first? And I use gang just as my Auntie Nora used to say that a lot, like Raven and his gang and stuff. So I'm not trying to put it in any type of stereotype. Go ahead.
With the Samalgic Tsimshian language, it's in Torixen or Torixit Noon is sort of in Torixen is sort of a condensed version, Torix being the root and the end part meaning you. So the longer version would be Torixit Noon, meaning the noon being you. So Torixen is kind of the casual version, and really what it means is I'm bound to you, like I kind of like I owe you for this, so I'm really like I'm bound to you is the more direct translation on that one.
Oh, excellent. Fabulous. Anyone else from any of our other language delegations?
I could share for Haida. So I think the most common one we hear say is hawa, which is thanks or thank you. And if that's for singular, for one person, you're saying it to. If you're saying it to multiple people, plural, it would be hawa u. I don't know if it's informal or formal, but another way to say thank you that would be a little bit more formal than just saying hawa or hawa u is saying dung ant kilt lagen. And that's another way of saying thank you, but literally if you break it down, dung is you, kill is like to speak or to say, and lagen is good. So if you broke it all down, it's basically saying you I speak good, to you I speak good. So that would be maybe a little bit more formal way to say I thank you. Hawa u dung ant kilt lagen, or the plural of that is the lung ant kilt lagen.
I took some guesses at spelling. Let me know if it's wrong, if any part of it needs adjusting. These are great. And then the middle one, those are three things that should be in a row. How anyone else? There's at least two other languages that are present here.
Singit gang, I feel like goodness cheesh is more than just like without you this is not possible, or thank you, because when people are speaking at like a kuich and they're just like talking about your clan, I mean you'll hear someone say goodness cheesh and they're not yelling out thank you. And you know, whether it be a kuich or if you're listening to like a story, I was listening to a recording and Date Hoon was talking about some of Nora's family, like their clan, and she's just said goodness cheesh, and it was just more mentioning, I mean, he wasn't even talking about her immediate family, but when he said it, she's like goodness cheesh, and that's how I kind of feel like it means more than just thank you or thanks for mentioning me or without you this is possible. That's what I feel like it means, because the way I hear it,
Cheesh. Okay. Anyone else? Any other? There might be several other indigenous languages that we're all working in. No? Okay, well, we got the three down here. So yeah, that's wonderful.
Oh, and Clomicas in the Lemmy language. I'm able to break it down as I'm more knowledgeable in Hudkill. But in the Lemmy language, to say thank you is Haishka. Haishka.
Oh, Ishka. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Do we know any other? I know Masi Cho, or you could say Masi, Anabasi. Oh, what is it in Dinaina? Chinan or Tsinan?
Yeah, and Degshnog, it's Dogaden, and to say thank you very much, it's Gete Dogaden.
Dogaden and Gita
Yeah.
Dogaden?
Gete Dogaden, yeah.
Ah, Gita Dogaden. Fabulous.
Koyana.
Koyana, Koyanak. Sometimes there's a Q on there when you go up to Inupiaq country. Koyanakpak is another one I've heard. Fabulous.
Oh, Iyak is Awa Ahta.
One more time.
Awa Ahta.
Awa Akhta. Yay. Hawaiian is Mahalo, or Mahalo Nui, or Mahalo Nui Loa. Nui is big. Loa is also, I think, kind of big that way. So you can say big, big. Any others?
Well, in Tagalog, it's salamat. And then you add, say salamat po is like, thank you very much.
Salamat po. Maikai. Do we know any others? Palamia is Lakota. Miigwech is Ojibwe. I went to first college many years ago. 1993, I went down to University of Minnesota. Hung out with a lot of folks down there. Okay. That was a great way to start. Just saying thank you in several different languages. There's a lot of languages that we're bringing to the table here. And today we're going to look at three lesson presentations. So basically, just to continue to have a discussion about why we're doing this, we're focusing on the act of making materials. That's the primary thing I'm interested in as far as taking a look at what you folks are making, and then also just sort of talking about how you're going to use it. And so sometimes we're looking at little picture things, sort of like, hey, how are we going to teach people this concept? You know, one of the things that I'm going to be working on is some stuff to just bring more Tlingit language into the sciences. So we're going to do a little kind of handout thing on glaciers with the idea that folks who are teaching natural sciences can teach a bunch of stuff about glaciers. And then also going to do a series on rocks, which is really fun. Then I want to do another series on all the different fish parts because they got fun names. And so one of the things as well, just to sort of present on anything that you're working on. I don't want you to feel confined. I also don't want you to feel pressure. The goal is we're just excited to see what we're all doing and what we're working on. And then sometimes we're going to have some of these bigger picture things, which is sort of like, what is the driving philosophy of your whole program? How are you delivering the language? What's your basic, you know, I mean, the dream would be there's a whole crew of you who are doing teaching and the administration of your school or program. And then you're going to bring on someone new. And if you brought on someone new, you should be able to just say, this is how we do things here. And we do things like this. And there's a whole bunch of wiggle room, right? Because not everybody learns the same. You're not going to have the same situation. Everything's got to be flexible. I don't think it's a linear process, really. I don't think education is ever a linear process unless you're just trying to cheat and trying to cut a bunch of people out of things. But then sort of like some of the other things, like what is what's the culture of the program? Like if I was some super rich person or some foundation, and like, oh yeah, you know, send me some stuff about your program. I want to see if we want to invest in this. Or maybe I'm a parent. So yeah, I think I'd like to send my kid to this school and have them educated in Samalgach first and then English. But you got anything you could show me to show me what it's going to be like? And so just having a good idea for that stuff really helps, because sort of it's like everything has a spirit. So your program or your school must also have a spirit. And there's a bunch of stuff that I saw in Hawaii, which reminds me there's a conference coming up. It's all virtual, but it's coming up in March. I'm going to try and get us all access to this conference. So we'll look at the schedule and what things look like for that week. I'll let you know next week probably. And we'll probably just sort of cancel our regular meetings and we'll all just go attend as much stuff as we can, which includes a virtual field trip to the school, which is called Navahi for short. That's the Hawaiian Medium School, and also the Aha Punana Leo. I talk about them a lot, and I think it'd be neat for you folks to see it. And then someday we'll go there sometime, you know, and just sort of have a big sort of curriculum retreat there over at the volcano if those cabins didn't get swallowed up by lava, which I don't think they did. So any questions or thoughts about the process before we turn it over to our first presenter? We'll do 3 of them today. We might have a little bit of extra time afterwards. We'll see.
I don't know that this 100% pertains to that, but I was thinking about just a class that's called Northwest Coast Art. I mean, because there's Northwest Coast Art everywhere, but really it's such like a broad horizon of Northwest Coast art that it should be narrowed down to just Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian. Everybody. It should be separated, I think, because then that's like learning Alaska Native languages, you know, and you're expected to know a language, but you end up learning all of them and you don't retain any of them. So I think that's kind of how like Formline, you know, it's its own language, and especially between Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian, Celtic, further north. I don't know what you think about that. I mean, I think it should be one class of just Tlingit, just Haida, just Tsimshian.
Oh, like the arts? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because you know, like I don't know, the classes that I'm in, you know, they're all just labeled Northwest Coast Arts, but really, I mean, you're learning such a wide, broad area of Northwest Coast art that you're not really learning as much. Like, you can't identify between Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian unless you study each of them individually. And you don't really do that in Northwest Coast art because you only have so much time to get something done, that it makes more sense to focus on one thing, one style, than all of them, you know, because there's such big differences.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it'd be good to pluralize the art parts. We call it Northwest Coast arts. And then it might be good to sort of emphasize one, to start by saying that we're going to focus on northern Northwest Coast arts, because we're not, the Makah have done things, but it's quite different. The Chaldeans and other groups, everybody's doing lots of stuff and have done, but it gets pretty different from the stuff that the similarities between Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian, Nishka styles they're so much more similar to each other than they are things when you start going further south. But then I do agree. So I think one is the focus should be on just specifying, like, we could look at this stuff a little bit, but our primary goal is really Northwest Coast arts. And that includes giving equal time and energy to weaving and to uh, working with fabrics and working with hides, and also working with, yarns and weavings and barks and roots. But then as far as like really dedicating the time so that you're building a base, if they're doing form line then, and then also, and this goes for weaving as well, but, and then to have a set of time where they really focus on what is the Tsimshian style, and then what is the Haida style, and what is the Tlingit style. That way they can self-select, and so they might have a lineage to a particular area. They might have lineage to multiple areas, but when they're making stuff or when they're copying an old design, they should know. They should be able to take a pretty accurate prediction of which group it comes from. Some of it gets a little, like some of the big boxes and stuff, they start to blend a little bit, but then if we get into sculptural stuff, it gets pretty clear.
Yeah, and that kind of, I mean, aside from just being in classes, like looking through that Russian book of Tlingit or Kulish, all the stuff they have in there, they said it's all Tlingit, but I mean, if you look close at it, there's things that just aren't Tlingit, and you can tell by the style, whether it might be Iyak or Sugpiak or maybe Tashoni. I mean, the Russians didn't know that there was other people really. They were just like, oh, you look like Tlingit too. Just like everybody looks like an Indian,
Well, yeah,
But yeah, go ahead.
With trade networks and other stuff too, like every group, it's not like they're the only ones who made the stuff that they have. So there's lots of commissioning of folks who are from other areas. There were items of trade for just everyday trade, and also sort of like, oh yeah, we got in this skirmish here, so we had to make really nice things for each other to kind of make peace, and that peacemaking ceremony is a big part of it. And also just sort of bringing folks up, like, oh yeah, this person's like a master this, we'll bring them up for a while or bring them down for a while. And those types of things definitely happened. And then to sort of nudge the conversation back towards language materials, then it's sort of like, can we create like the school of our dreams, like going back to Navahi, they've got a outdoor program, and this guy who's like a really an expert in Hawaiian plants and also animals. They raise pigs, and then they kill that pig and eat it for their graduation. So the kids sort of are familiar with that animal, and they also talk a lot about their practices regarding animals and the process of preparing them and eating them. And then and then they have a lot of programs too that are just distinctively Hawaiian. And so for these, like whatever we build, I think there should be a lot of knowledge sharing as well. But then could you do a class on basket weaving and do the whole thing in your target language? Could you do a whole course? And so the first thing is, if you don't have them already, building up someone who can master both things. Like they could become a carver, and they can also become competent in teaching people how to carve. And then they could also be a language speaker and teacher. So if you can say the stuff like, this eye is a little bit lower than this eye, and then just the types of things you're showing us the other day with the measuring. And can you do that all in the language? And that means we're going to have to figure out all these different things that if we don't know how to say them, and if we can't find someone who does, we're going to have to sometimes manufacture how to say those things. And this is where it gets into a pretty interesting area, because you might have to bring the whole language back into something, like weaving them. They had all the terms, but I don't know if we have all the terms now in terms of, two under, one over, and the warp and the weft, and just all these different things in terms of, so that you're not saying the name of the tool and then one phrase, but then doing everything in English. And so, but that could be your starting point, and then you got to have these goals. So bring the whole language into the realm of teaching the art. So if you're going to teach the arts, and so this kind of I think towards the end of Monday's class, I was asking you folks, like in this school, in this program of your dream, what kind of subjects would you be teaching? And then what do you need to be prepared to teach those subjects? And so arts is one thing, history, how would you teach history? And so in the school in Hawaii, they make all their own textbooks until about junior high. And then I think they just sort of, that's a lot to just really be producing and updating texts. Although there have been fully Hawaiian language newspapers for a long time. Like they've been writing and publishing their language for hundreds of years. And so it's really interesting to think of like they have probably 10,000 pages of just newspapers totally written in Hawaiian. And they write it differently now than they did then, but that's something that we don't have, you know. So to have records of the language for everyday stuff. And then also figuring out like, what would you be doing? Would you be sending students home and say, read this textbook in English and come back and we'll talk about it in Haida? Or, you know, you're going to have to come up with some strategies, and then there's going to be the short game, and then there's going to be the long game. So the long game could be, we've got to write these textbooks. But then it's always a resource question. Do you have enough people? Do you have enough time? Do you have enough money? And can you get past the sort of things that just get people stuck in these patterns where you're sort of spending too much time criticizing each other individually rather than just pushing stuff out there and then fixing it in the process, right? Because you're building the plane as you're flying, and so that's a really big challenge. And another thing that we'll probably have to talk about some more, and maybe next week, is the production of media. So you know, most of us have some kind of phone, and that phone has like a full high definition video camera built right into it. So there's a bunch of stuff that we could be doing, but I feel like we just need to get better at the production end so that we have a product and we have sort of a way to implement it and to keep track of it. So good discussion. We should probably move on to our presenters, and we could come back to stuff later if we want to.
Corey, I'm going to have to leave, but I just wanted to say Ganchish to everybody for sharing your dream schools. I watched the video, and at some point I would love to talk about Waldorf schools, because I feel it talks about head, hands, and heart, and they create their own textbook using main lesson books, and they do handwork from kindergarten through 12th grade, and it talks about truth, beauty, and goodness based on the age of the child. Lots of oratory, lots of arts, lots of outdoor connections on how to work with the land. So, and I know Hune, we did a presentation for the language nest on the philosophy. So it just made me think about using something that that's some ideas from that philosophy in doing at least for my dream school. There's some pieces there that really fit. So Gunachish, everyone. I love the boat and the the science on the boat, and bringing camp into the schools, and just trying to cross that bridge or that artificial barrier between schools and community. I was really inspired by your conversation. So Gunachish.
Geez, yeah, if you want to pick a Monday or Wednesday, and maybe we'll start, if you want to just take 10 minutes or so and just talk to us about an introduction to what Waldorf is and maybe a few principles, and we can have folks take deeper dives if that's the direction they're going to go in. It really helped the language nests. Early childhood education tends to lean towards Waldorf or Montessori or somewhere in between, but those seem to be two of the main ones that language schools sort of pick up. And so it seemed to me like the Mohawk programs were leaning more towards the Waldorf method, and then the Hawaiian programs were leaning more towards the Montessori programs. And so, and it's not like you have to ever pick, but you should always just analyze these things and say, what aligns with the types of things that we want to do. And one time I was in Hawaii, I was sitting there in a class, and it was early childhood development, and the whole class was online. There were some people in the room and more people that were on the screen, but it was all in Hawaiian. And I didn't understand Hawaiian at the time. I just looked at my two colleagues, one from Mohawk and one from Guam, and I was like, I don't even really know what's going on, but I know this is amazing. This is incredible. And so you're going to develop these things in your program. Is what are the philosophies in terms of how to teach kids, and then and people, and then what are the techniques you're going to be utilizing. And I'm just saying, like, you don't have to become a full Waldorf program. You don't have to become a full TPR program, but these should all be things in your toolbox, and some of them will make it into the center, the core of sort of the culture of the program. The program should have its culture, and sometimes you're going to find things at work, and then you'll say, okay, that's what they're doing. Well, we'll take these parts, and then we'll change this part, and it's really fun stuff. Good, Chiefs, for sharing. Okay, yaktishi, itkoha.
Okay. All right. Did it show up? Never mind.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Chief. So I had decided to kind of create a lesson that was focused around mealtime, so language for the table. I had created this intended for probably like high school and up. I kind of kept in mind though that trying to challenge myself in these times to kind of create materials that could be delivered online easily, because I feel like that's just kind of my challenge from just my personal challenge. So I created this mealtime lesson that has nouns. I have some verb phrases, and so what I wanted to do was to ask students, to kind of describe their time around a meal with their families, who's there, what language they use, what items are found at their table during a meal, and then just kind of jump in to introducing the nouns. So going through them kind of one at a time together. I wouldn't want students to kind of jump in speaking right away, so I would be doing all the talking. But what I probably would have the students do is create like a I think it's called TPR, so like a gesture for each word. So we'll, go could be, and then we go to the next one. Once we go through all the vocab, I would challenge them to come over here and try and pair the word and their motion, going through these one at a time. And then we would kind of visit over here some take-home materials or something they could use that has all the nouns that we used, using them one at a time on the back of it. So this would be for their at-home use, that has everything that's on the lesson plan. Sorry, there are some blanks in here because I didn't have translations. Let's see. After a couple activities introducing the nouns and then kind of building, just letting the students hear the language and then kind of challenging them to speak the language a little bit, I did have that placement handout for their study, and then going back to review any nouns, and then try to encourage them to speak a little more, to kind of break that nervousness, have like a game available so students could play, challenge them to read it, say it out loud, even with a gesture, play a game that's easy, and hopefully a little pressure. And then I would like to go into phrases, so start including phrases a little bit in a little more delivery to one another, just using that language. I do have to admit it was kind of hard, because once you get to like phrases and whatnot, I feel like sometimes it's a little silly to use the games. So I had thought that maybe some independent study would be good. So coming to different tools that are available to help with the pronunciation, to see or to hear and to practice speaking yourself is another great tool for the students to start to keep hearing and having the opportunity to speak the language. Let's see. So once kind of like, it's kind of a long time. I feel like it's a long time. I apologize. I heard lesson. I'm like, oh my gosh. So after going through nouns and verb phrases, the Q&A I feel like would be a little bit more delivery with one another in practicing speaking with one another. So going around the room, going around the room, giving students a chance to speak and just hearing the language. So really emphasizing that hearing piece. so that the ear, you start training their ears to hear and gain some familiarity with the language. At the end, I had feel like I'm kind of jumping forward. Hopefully, like if in class, it would be fun to have like a luncheon and real assessment, and maybe having them kind of fill in the blanks as we're role playing. So dasaya, what is this, and have them label, and then write in the blanks at the end. Hooch away.
Sheesh. Feedback from the group.
This idea is so cool, and it reminded me that when I was at Middlebury learning Japanese, they did this with us for lunch, and they required us to go to I think they call them language tables, and they did just like you showed, images and phrases to practice, and then we would go eat together and talk, and that helped us a lot. So I think your idea is really functional and well put together. And then maybe add phrases for, like, if you're doing it virtually, you might ask each other things like dasa iha, like what are you eating, and stuff like that, since we wouldn't be in person. But
oh geez.
Okay.
Something to add to that too with I know a lot of people who are like they're allergic to this or they're allergic to that. That could be something I never even thought of looking that up in Tlingit. Like, are you allergic to any of this that I brought over, or just something to think? I just thought about as you were watching your presentation.
I just wanted to add, I really liked that you wanted to do like a little gesture for each one. I know it's like this is mainly for food, but when I was in a culture camp in middle school, they made us come up with our own gestures for each food. And to this day, I still remember all this almost 10 years later. So I really like that. I think it works. Sounds great.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about muscle memory and actions and sort of whether we're incorporating ASL. And some folks have reached out to me about sort of like how would we do that? How would we sort of look at something? Could we sort of train some folks who know ASL in Tlingit and then figure out a way to sort of, because for when we were raising our first child and when she went to daycare, she was pretty young, and it was really interesting because a lot of the folks at daycare, probably Tagalog was their primary language. That would be my guess. And so what they requested was that we taught our kids sign language just at the basic level. And so we were teaching her sign language, and we found that that was a bridge because I was speaking in Tlingit and my wife was speaking in English. And then we also, like, if any of you are trying to do multilingual households, and sort of one model that you could apply is a one parent, one language model, which I saw two different families that did that. One was one of my teachers who was British, but her mother was French. And so she spoke only in French to her kids. And then the other, she was from Uruguay, and so she spoke only in Spanish to her kids. And so it was really interesting as I watched them, and I talked to them about like how that worked. And then we started thinking that we should try that. And that's what we did. And the sign language helped to bridge the two languages. And then the other thing that you have to do is, the unfortunate side is you cannot translate for your partner all the time. Like you can hardly, I would recommend you hardly ever translate for your partner. Tell them later, but we had to have a few conversations and I just, we had to say, well, we won't always know what each other's talking about. But now my wife understands most everything I say, which is really great. But now I can't have secret messages to my kids. Like sometimes they'll say, just like, wait, that. And so she'll say, don't say that. So I was like, that's what white people do. That's not our thing. And so, and so we gotta just sort of, but in terms of, I really liked the use of Quizlet, and so I'm not sure if everybody here knows how to use Quizlet. That'd be something worth exploring for us. I saw Flippity on there, I think it was called, to do the flip cards. My kids were at a online birthday party and they played Drawasaurus. I was like, we could just totally do that, and just basically doing Pictionary and just using our language. And so, especially thinking of online stuff, but also just games. And so a couple other things I wanted to mention. Uh, we like to play that game, I think it was called Heads Up, where you put your phone up and there's a picture of something and everybody has to describe what it is and you got to guess what you are. And there's a timer on it. And that's very fun to do in your language. And if you haven't done stuff like that, it pushes you from naming things to describing things. And once you have to describe things, you're forced to kind of up your fluency a bit. Like, for example, if I was to say, if we saw two porcupines that were walking down the road, and I said, okay, tell me in your language the difference between those two. Explain that to me. Like that's pushing you out of this, into this complex area, because we spend a lot of time probably in areas that are fairly basic, like this is that, this is that, this does this does that. But then once you start to sort of, which one should I shoot? Which one, uh, what's the behavior? What's the cultural knowledge of these animals? What do we know about them? What do we observe? What do we learn from them? And those are the conversations I think we should be pushing each other towards. And then the other thing, and these are inspired by just watching your presentation. There's a website called gamecrafter.com, and we should be making our own board games. I really want to make sort of a large role-playing game where you're just sort of wandering through from community to community, and you'll have sort of like kind of these community cards, like, so you could draw one. It says, you discovered this source of copper, like you suddenly become like super wealthy, or you got captured by a Kushika or Fagid or whatever the monsters are. You gotta stay for 2 turns, and or there's a big potlatch in Metlakatla, everybody's got to go. And so I think you could really have fun with stuff like this. And so the game crafter, it's sort of like you develop, yeah, it's sort of like a D&D, exactly. It's level up, like, I'm a level 16, whatever you would be like. And so, but I think stuff like that would be really fun, because then we're creating more tools for us to do more things in our language. Because the other trap that we get caught in is we end up just doing the exact same thing every time. And we've got to sort of try and meet the needs and get diverse enough. So there is a group that goes and nerds out and plays the language version of D&D, and that's not for everybody. But then there's another group that goes and does this other thing. And sometimes we all get together and do everything, because it's not about what we like to do, it's about supporting the movement. So yeah, it was a series of thoughts. Great stuff. Check out those resources. I know there's some other ones too. I'm trying to remember another flip thing where, like, basically you issue a challenge and everybody posts a short video response to it. So those things are getting a little bit easier with the technology that's mostly available to folks. You can also explore grant programs where you get, if you had 20 participants, you could get them all an iPad. Like, you could find money to do stuff like that, and then you push things out through the iPad network. But anyways, other thoughts, or shall we move on? What do you folks want to do? Okay, fabulous, great stuff. And just to, I think someone mentioned a placemat. I do think the Language Nest had made laminated placemats, and so it'd be neat to just sort of, like, whatever is coming out of the Language Nest or these school programs, like, one of the bigger questions is how do we just push that out to everybody? And so just creating some consistently available stuff, so that the other program that's probably happening that I'd suggest we do in all languages is a book for language in the home. And so basically we just sort of thought of every room that people spend time in a home. And there's probably some that we need to add, like a workshop. And not everybody has all the same stuff, but you could just put some things, and then you'll put common names of things in there that you'll commonly find, like a dish, cup, fork, spoon, knife. And then there'll be a whole bunch of common sort of phrases that are going to help people use the language. And so there'll be a book with audio, and then there'll be little flip books that you could keep in each room of each house, so that it really encourages the language to live in the home. Okay, next, Nang Atas.
So I don't have a visual representation for my lesson plan because I feel it's pretty basic, and I won't be teaching you guys a lesson. But my target students are early elementary students, like grades K through 3rd. And what I plan on teaching them is the orthography for Hodkill, the contemporary one. And what I intend on doing is like having like a place card for each letter, and while displaying each letter, I plan on having a side profile of a head, and explain to them where each letter is pronounced, as there are quite a few characters in Hodkill that can be complicating for some to pronounce. And once I have done that, I think it would be great to pull students one by one and ask them if they have any trouble with with pronouncing any of the letters, and just guide them through and really repeat the word and have them voice it out with you. And once I can tell that they have pronounced each character the way it's supposed to be pronounced, I intend on teaching them the different kin terms like nan, chana, awa, hung, or had, and teaching them to give a basic introduction. Nothing too extensive, maybe just who they are, who their parents are, and their clan, and if they want to learn more, then I'll certainly be more than happy to share with them how to share that information when giving an introduction. And yeah, I had a different idea last week. Like, I thought we were going to like share a list of different lessons that we wanted to teach on. That's why I'm not really prepared, nor have I like really made anything for this, but that's what I plan on teaching. So yeah, we plan. That's it. How
Any reactions, feedback, thoughts? this sounds great. So like this three-step sort of thing. So starting with sounds and then like doing a lot so that folks are able to recognize the sounds and for kids as well. So the the nice thing usually about our languages is you have one symbol for one sound quite often. So there's no like OUGH or PH as opposed to F type of stuff that you sort of have to explain when learning how to write in English. And so
Right.
writing is something that you can get folks going pretty quickly on. The disadvantage is sometimes, I think it has 60 plus sounds. And so sometimes you have like 60 some letters, right? But it makes sense and then to focus on sort of associating that sound. Hawaiian only has 11 sounds. And so they made what you call a syllabary, which is every consonant vowel combination, and then they made a song out of it, and they work on that, and then they've got every sound, like basically a consonant and a vowel is your primary combination, and so they go through every sound, and then they really do a lot with recognizing those letters. But just for fun, I did it for Tlingit, and there was like 800 different, it's like an 800 part song or something. And so
That's scary.
but just thinking like how to do it could be some sort of song or repeating pattern just to get those, because sometimes with both kids and adults, like songs are great. They really help to push and reinforce some of these things. And so and then moving towards kinship terms, like it's really fun. And I made a few sort of illustrations. So like the primary illustration is like the little people, and then the rest of the stuff on this thing is just sort of lines towards things. And so you can go up in generation, then you go down in generation. So grandparents and great grandparents and stuff are going up, grandchildren are going down. And so one of the things that you could do for something like this is, because it's also matrilineal, so you have, let me make sure I get this right. Solid lines are for, well, I think I had it. So we have solid lines and dotted lines. And so one of them could be for your clan, and then the other could be the opposite clan, if you marry into opposite clans. And so if you might have 4 clans or multiple, it gets a little bit more complicated. But here, like if you have a 2 moiety system, you could do some stuff like this. And so there's a folder that I'll share with you folks, and it has basically everything I use to create language materials. And you're always free to use stuff as templates. You don't have to ask permission. You don't have to credit me or anything. You could just take it and run with it. And if you want to, because it's stuff that you can't alter the original file, so download it and just do whatever you want. There's a folder called with stock images and stock illustrations, and so those are there to use. And if you folks are looking for anything, just say, well, I want to make some curriculum. I'm looking for a picture of a kingfisher. Like, I've probably got it. And if I don't have it, I can get it for you. And then it's fully licensed to use. You could publish it in books. You could do whatever you want. And so stock imagery is stuff that you pay for. And you can use found imagery, but if you start sort of producing anything that ends up being for sale, you could open yourself up to some difficulty there. Some people might come at you, and it might not be too bad. There was someone who he was real mad because they used his photograph for some publication, and he went in their office all mad. And then they said, "What do you want?" And he says, "Well, I really like that potted plant." And they're like, "That's what you want?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so they gave it to him. So, but sometimes it's going to involve money and other stuff like that. So just something to keep in mind. And also taking your own photographs and using your own stuff. But then sometimes there's an internal and an external world. So the Language Nest might be making books, but those books aren't for everybody, because they have pictures of kids and their families, and that doesn't need to go out to the whole world. So sometimes you're having stuff that is for just the school program and the families, but then other times you're making stuff that's for everybody, because there's a whole bunch of people that want to raise their kids in languages.
Right. And then one thing that I had forgotten to mention is to like have gestures for each of the characters, placing the hands or my hand like where the characters spoken, and then have them repeat after me. I think that would really help them memorize each of the letters and how they're pronounced.
How okay, well, let's move along. Au Dagan.
Okay, where is this thing? The colors thing. Then share this thing. Okay, you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm probably gonna butcher me pronouncing this, so please have patience. So actually Shelly Charles, the one I was introducing last time, I was talking about it wanting to do some sort of song, because that's usually the best method of delivering curriculum to little grades. And we're talking like early elementary, preschool, kindergarten, first grade. And then she goes, you should do bingo. And I was like, that's a really good idea. So then we thought about it, and colors seem to be good, but I don't know if this is like the right combination of things. I'll try my best. So this is up for you guys to edit if you'd like. And I also I uploaded it to the folder on our class drive under curriculum. So, I mean, in theory, it should sort of sound like Kitchkanagatwutika Dujiwuk on Flinget Henakan or Khan Kananik on Yakyati on Yakyati on Yakyati Khan you do a sock, and then you would like repeat, for the other colors. And then we were thinking of involving Skittles somehow to do this, because a lot of times kids could just, they need something in their hands. They like sugar. You could drag a teacher nuts. It just seems like a really good situation all around. Pooch.
Sheesh. Thoughts?
Could record Skittles like pouring out of a bag with your phone, like with a cool background, and then just loop that, and then just have that in the background.
That's a good idea. Or the kids or something, just like vomiting like red Skittles, and then each color.
You could pull in Marshawn Lynch. He was a big like Skittles person,
Oh yeah, that'll be easy. I'll just give him a call.
Great. Yeah, fabulous. And like just really working through these colors, and then the rainbow songs are always helpful, and a couple of things to think about from a language perspective. There was this really cool thing I learned only about a year ago. So I was in a meeting, and Dolores Churchill kept mentioning this book by Emmons that was talking about the Chilkat blanket. And she mentioned it a few times, and I said, what is this book? I never heard of it. And she told me about it, and it's out of print. It's pretty hard to find. There's a first edition, and then there's subsequent editions. But I found it online, I bought it, and as I was looking through it, they had documented how to say the color, right? So like Khan is fire, and then Khan Yachyati is literally, it's like fire, but then that's how you say something is red. But if you put Ka right in front of that, so you have Khan, that's how you say red. And I was like, whoa, that is so awesome. I never knew that. And so, Yeah, that was really cool. And then you might just think about some kids do have a hard time seeing, like as kids learn to read, some of them have dyslexia, and that the colors could send them for us, could send them for a swirl. Like they could go down the Skittles swirl, like just sometimes with the color. So you could have a color version, and then you could have maybe a version where the text is in just black, and then you have the colors all around it or something. There's ways to block that out. And I don't know if a solid, like total green background with black text on it also might be kind of tricky, but you could do it right in the middle or something. There might be some ways to do that so that you can replicate that rainbow and that color gradient, which is great. But then you won't be throwing some folks off. I remember I had a student, I taught 4 writing classes per semester when I first started teaching at college. And I just graded so many papers, just so many papers. And I got to this person's paper pretty late in the process. And the paper was like a sunset. So it would go from kind of a pink all the way down through orange and all this other stuff to a dark red. And by about page 8, I was getting kind of nauseous just reading it. And then I gave it back, and she said, sorry, I ran out of paper. I had to use this colored paper. I said, but it was white on the other side. Anyways, that was a bit of a sidetrack. Great stuff. Love it. Any other thoughts, folks?
And before I forget, if there's some other, I pulled the screen down to purple because if you have any other suggestion for purple, like I feel like I'm already like really mushing my words together really fast to like go with the bingo song, and then like you have kind of kahini, and that's like I don't know. I feel like this is gonna be like a verbal chubby bunny situation. Just lots of words.
You might cut wuti and ka, and so you just sort of break the pattern in order to make room for the word, because yeah, it's a long one.
Yeah. I also think kanata kahini is such a yummy word. I think that means blueberry juice, right? I think you should make space for it because it's such an emotionally evocative word. Like it just sounds so yummy. It makes me want to remember how to say purple.
Yeah, it is a yummy word. Good way to put it. It's definitely the best of the color words.
Yeah, I think you should keep it in.
All right, I'll rearrange some of this. I really appreciate the advice, guys.
My kids like to make things. That's one of their things now is I'll be teaching, and Mariah will be in meetings, and so the kids will just decide to make stuff. And we haven't really squashed the thing because they're being creative, and then sometimes we get to try things like eat my bread, and we're like, okay, and it's usually pretty good. But every now and then it's kind of a real spongy type of thing. Like love them, but sometimes you got some surprises, But brought that up because they like to use frozen berries a lot. So kanata kahini is kind of the color of our kitchen sometimes, but it's just sort of like you just gotta go through and wash but it's it's fun stuff. Any other thoughts?
I think just like if you're trying to fit more in sometimes, like when you're doing songs like this, I think it's about slowing down the tempo, and then you could still use the same amount of words. Instead of like da 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 da, it's da 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 da, and then you could fit the words in at an easier pace. Does that make any sort of sense? Like,
yeah, it does. I would super welcome you to perform for all of us, and we can just note that.
oh, I'm so embarrassed. Okay, 5, 6, 7, 8. But yeah, so I think that would be awesome. But this is great. I really dig this.
For all of our programs, like, and I know a lot of us are starting and we'll just grab a melody from a nursery rhyme because they already know the melody, and so now, and it makes a lot of sense because now it's sort of like they know the melody and now they could focus on what the words are and putting the words together. A couple of thoughts though is that's what they did in Hawaii, but then they made this decision that at some point they started making their own songs. So that the songs, and they have an advantage because I think I mentioned this before. The ukulele is just totally their thing, and they can just like bust out a whole band and just play Hawaiian songs all night long. And so until we sort of get that world, which maybe we should just stop all this and we'll start a band, and then we'll figure that out and we'll make a bunch of music, and then we'll come back and we'll pick it all back up again. But at some point we're going to have to start making our own songs, but that's going to require like extensive study of what our songs are. But then there's so much room to make new ones, and then there's also room to take this stuff into. You could bring it. It doesn't have to be a drum. It could be a drum. That's fabulous, but it could also be a guitar. It could also be. We could go learn the ukulele and then start making. No, but we could do some stuff. Then the other thing is sort of like making sure we're bringing them back from the song, because the language has tone and vowel length and stuff that's going to be affected by the song, which is totally fine because they're going to have the pattern there. But then when they come back, we're going to work on them with these individual words to make sure that when they're speaking, they've got, oh yeah, so yeah, everybody who gets into the Hawaiian like program, they're required to get a ukulele. We weren't required, but I should have probably said we were, because then I could have gotten one. But yeah, so you have to know how to play it too. It's pretty well. Other thoughts, ideas on this particular one? We also got about 20 minutes. If you folks want to sort of move into any other sort of discussion.
Yeah, I just like, how much language there was because, you said it was for younger kids. And I remember starting off high school and we had a color sheet and it was maybe half of that. It was just the colors in themselves. And that gives them a lot of, like I saw, ka, do, you, and just a lot of those fillers, like even if they don't go home with them, they've been using them. And so when they are reintroduced to them in a beginning Tlingit class, it's not totally new information. We did a similar exercise once where I was kind of near the end of high school, and we had a lady come in, and she gave us starburst, and we were just naming off the individual colors, and we were kind of looking around like, because it totally felt like a lesson for little kids. But that, had tons of language, bigger sentences. But yeah, the candy, I think they'll like the candy more than we did.
Yeah, Kuchain, you bring up a great point, which is as we are developing these lessons, how do we bring them, keep them going? Because another thing that does tend to happen in a lot of language programs is we'll keep teaching the same concept. And so, but one of the difficulties is that you've got sometimes students, there's new students who come in, there's, and so without programs that really have these sort of upward trajectories in terms of pushing folks towards fluency, sometimes like we keep going back to the beginning to be polite to folks who join us. And so that's one thing we have to resolve. And I think another thing we have to resolve is sometimes external forces holding us back a little bit, and sometimes ourselves holding us back a little bit. So, how can we push this farther? And then and colors, so again, like I think going into some curriculum that teaches about the entire world, that's the steps that should be beyond these things. And so these things were great, like as far as teaching stuff and teaching kids, but then I was thinking about developing some things. I think I showed you folks that the ecosystem and walking people through the ecosystem and talking to them about, like, can we teach what's everything that we know about a halibut? And like, could we do that in the language that our students fully, they understand so much stuff, or like that halibut hook, right? There's you could do a whole like huge lesson on the halibut hook, and that could include making the halibut hook, the terms for the wood that's used. Do y'all know in Smelgech and Hatkil what the word for the wood yew is? Y-E-W. Anybody know the names of the name that's used for?
I looked it up. I didn't know it, but I looked it up real quick. The dictionary shows that it's skeet.
Skeet?
I could type it in the chat.
Oh. Anybody know it in Smelgech? Anybody know it in Singit?
Sucks away.
So sucks is also the word that's for a bow, like a bow and arrow, and shingit. And so it's really interesting. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that, you know, just thinking of lesson ideas, and one of the things that we're trying to do in this class is just get to a point where we're pretty good at coming up with an idea and turning it into a lesson. And then also figuring out, what do we do with this lesson now for the kids who come back the next year? Or what's the thing we teach beyond this, so that everything's leading to something. Wow, yeah, see, that's the same. And then chus is crab apple tree, and that's also the word for club. So I was really interested, because then I wanted to sort of like, how can these things lead to another thing? So we've got the halibut, and we could start with the halibut, and we can also talk about, and thing it's called eat, which is the deep part of the ocean where the halibut likes to live. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do, like yeah, I think Kachtzin brought it up. Someone was talking about when they got a really big halibut, some people like to cook the stomach of the halibut and eat the stomach. And there was a certain way it was boiling, and then letting it sit, and then cutting it, and then frying it. And it was like the texture of onion rings, I think she was saying. So then there's a whole bunch of there's a bunch of cultural knowledge there about food and food preparation. There's also stuff there's a bunch of things about what kind of halibut are you supposed to be going for. I don't think you're supposed to always be getting the really big ones. And then that could lead you into, what does a halibut eat? What does it do? What's its behavior? When it's born, it has the eyes, and then the one eye drifts over, you know. And can we talk about this stuff, and that the bottom side of the fish, and it's always looking up? There's a whole bunch of stuff that we could do. Then that could lead you to the halibut hook, and then you talk about the making of the halibut hook, the two types of wood that are typically used, which is often, and not all the time, but often yew and yellow cedar. And then the reason why and how it sits, and there's a rock that people would get out of the stomach of a sea lion, and then it sits above. And then in Tlingit anyways, there's certain phrases that you use for your halibut hook to send it down to taunt and fight with that halibut. And then when you get the halibut, there's the hook, it turns it upside down as you're pulling it up. And then you're also able to get it just really tired by waiting and letting it fight itself to being tired, and then pull it up. And they said it's nearly dead by the time it comes up. And so then there's a single blow that you were able to give it, and then you pull it in. So then that could lead to this other discussion about the trees and the types of trees, and what we know about them and how they're used, and these different types of wood. So I'm just trying to think, as far as this is the conversation of curriculum building, this very interconnected set of concepts that we're walking folks through. Because if our languages are going to revitalize, we have to move past teaching them and into using them. And part of the problem is we're stuck teaching them, teach. And at some point we've got to use the languages, so that we're starting to figure out all these different things that we collectively might not know how to say. Out again.
I don't know if this already exists, but that's my question. Is there like a list that exists where that kind of shows shared words? Because I remember this, I remember when we were up north and Anna was your friends, and I always think about this. And they said the Danaka word for salmon was huk, and that's the same word for coho for Klinke. And I mean, in like a lesson that could stem from that is like exactly like how did that word develop? Like because it's so similar. I mean, and perhaps like when did two different cultural groups meet? You know, and why did they decide that? I don't know. Like why is this a shared thing? I mean, and there might not be a why, but there might be, and I just think it's really cool.
Yeah, I think about that too, that little gathering of nations we had up there. And
All the time. That food was so good.
yeah, that was good. And shuka, yeah, that's our word for salmon. And
Oh.
same for caribou. We call it madzich. And I think in Tlingit it's watzich. So,
I
same.
think the fish thing is like a Nadine language thing because it's something like flow in Dene, like Navajo.
Oh, so cool.
I think rabbit is another one that's really common in a lot of Dene languages. And
I
not
think a list and lessons stemming from it would be a really cool thing, though.
well, yeah, I think one is, and so this could cross, there could be one project that's looking at Dene languages and similar shared words and also shared concepts. Like one time I was helping to teach Tlingit during celebration, at these little breakout sessions, and this group of Navajo students came, and the way that things were going, I thought I could probably teach these guys Tlingit in like a month, because everything that I was naming, like, oh yeah, we got that. It's this thing, we got that. Like just in terms of the grammar of the language. But I think another really neat project would be to do that in Southeast Alaska with our 3 languages here. There's so many shared words, and what does that mean? Like, what is the Samalgich word for a chilkat blanket? Can anybody tell me? We'll have to wait for that answer, and also for the headdress, because like what we call. Was there an answer?
I was gonna say something, but go ahead.
Oh, so what we call shakiat, which is the frontlet headdress with the sea lion whiskers and then the ermine skins around it, is called sakiat in Haida. And then nachin is what we call a chilkat blanket. It's nachin in Hatkil. So like it'd be really interesting too, because sometimes I think about this stuff and then I think about, well, where did this type of thing generally originate? Because some of those things sort of like, well, we were all doing a lot of this stuff, but then some of them it's like, oh yeah, these guys had it and then they shared it with us and we traded. And so it's really fun to do a bunch of that stuff too. And if we had, I think that the goal would be if we developed schools in Southeast Alaska for our languages, and it'd probably be like these 3 schools. Right? We'd have to figure out where these 3 schools are. And then there should be, each one of those 3 schools should also be producing some base level fluency in our neighboring languages. So we've got these real strong partnerships, because as I was sitting in the Hawaiian school, I think I mentioned this as well, like to watch kids learning Japanese, a lot of them were learning Japanese before they were really studying English. And so it was really fascinating.
Just going back to the shared words, what started my curiosity on that was I haven't heard the Shimshan and Haida words for bears, but I've heard that they're the same, if not similar. And in my mind, if you're out and about and there's 3 and there's 3 Klinkits, there's 3 Shimshans, and there's 3 Haidas, and there's 1 bear, you're gonna figure out a way to tell those people there's a bear over there. And I think that sense of do what you got to do, I think that definitely things like rabbits, rabbits are small, they don't take a whole lot of preparation to cook, and there's not a whole lot of material left over to work with. I think those practicalities really connected the different cultures. But if anyone knows the different words for bears, I would like to hear that. Thank you.
I heard that too. I mean, I've read that like hoots is this. It's used for Shmaliak and Hodkill, but I don't know if I'm completely accurate on that. But some things I've read point to that.
I did. It is hoots in Hatkill. Is that correct?
Hoots would be for brown bear, and we have Ton for black bear.
Right. And that's really interesting because like hoots is the same. Like that's also brown bear and Tlingit. Ton is sea lion, but Ton is also the name of Prince of Wales Island, which is it's interesting. I like lots of stuff to think about.
There's also this Hodkill or this Haida group of people, like a house group. I'm not sure if you call them clans, and I don't want to mess this up, so forgive me. But it sounds like the word for like Gixin or something for Tsimshian people. And then I mean they have like house groups like within that in Haida groups. And I was wondering if like some of these things are clan related or group related. Maybe words might be transferable, shared because families are shared. I don't know.
Yeah, good questions. Okay. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? So next week, we're going to continue our readings on curriculum. And so I think I'll probably end up showing you folks a few different things. Like I'll show you one thing that I was thinking about sharing with y'all. Just thinking about, let's see. Thinking about the big picture of things. Like I did a lot of sort of talking and studying and thinking about this stuff and sort of dialogues with some of my colleagues who were at Hilo at the time, and really trying to figure out like what does it mean to have like a fully functional language program. And as we were sort of talking and coming up with some terms and figuring out what we're trying to sort of generally do, and we're reading a lot of sort of philosophies that were coming out of the field of linguistics, and we felt like some of them were lacking a few things, which were sort of the like how do you just keep the thing indigenous? How do you make sure the thing is indigenous? And that's a very challenging thing. Like how do you create a school when the model of the school descends from as far as America goes, it descends from something that's a tool of assimilation and genocide. So how do you transform that to become something different? And so some of the terms that we were thinking of was this one, which is metacognition, which is you just have this sense of hyper awareness and you're always looking for something that's really going to just be reinforcing the colonial model, or what we call the hegemony. So the hegemony means it's just the default way of doing things, which is to leave out indigenous peoples, right? So there's a bunch of things that do that. Like they don't have to even think about the state of our languages and the inclusion of our own peoples, because by default it's already established and already excludes by default. So some of the things like trying to think through the home, right? Because the whole goal, I think, is you're creating new speakers, you're protecting your existing speakers, you're making your language the language of power and use, but you're trying to bring it home as well, right? So that it's a living, breathing language. It's what's used in the home as at least one of the primary languages. And so just thinking of that and then making sure you're thinking about the interconnectedness of it all, some of these cultural values that should be just living, breathing, absolute core values of your system, and then having an indigenous specific worldview. So yes, we're going to teach about the world, and yes, we're going to teach about history, but what has happened in our communities is the primary sort of area. We want to have a really high level of fluency of clans and kinship and histories and civil rights leaders from our region. And so this is sort of like the big picture underlying type of stuff. And then you come in here and this is everything you're generally trying to do and keep track of. So at the core of it all is what we call policy and planning. So the planning is sort of like, what are we doing? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? Who's going to do this part? What comes next? And so you're always trying to just sort of be in this state of constant planning, and then the policy is sort of the decisions that you make. So policies could be some things like, well, that doesn't allow underlined characters, so what do we do? What's the step after that? Or one of my policies is I don't correct people when they spell their indigenous name. I'm not into that. And I don't think anybody should be, but that's also maybe not a hard and fast rule. Like if it's just really doesn't match and you're just trying to say, oh yeah, well here's one method that you could use to spell that, you know, but that's something that you're going to have to determine. If you have students come in and then they had their name and you thought their name was maybe incorrect, like they actually have a different name, like those are things you could develop policy for. And then just quickly kind of going around the room, around this wheel here. So acquisition is just getting people to pick up the language, to learn it. And that is strongly connected to this concept called willingness to communicate. Because I know lots of people who know the language, but they won't talk it. They just won't. And also like teaching the language, I'll tell you, like there's a lot of silent time while you're waiting for people to go for it. You know, so how do you get them to just dive into the water? And that's related to usage. So you need to have safe places to use the language, because if I use the language and then somebody yells at me and I get embarrassed, I might not do it again. And then this concept called Re-Vernacularization. That's just a big word for saying, what do people talk about every single day? And how do we make sure that they're choosing the indigenous language to do that? What do you like to talk about? Sports, who's running around with who's had a new baby, who won in basketball, who got a new car, like whatever that thing is, movies, stories, songs, we got to figure out how to do all that stuff in the language. We'll go around the rest of the wheel later. I'll do it real fast. So corpus is sort of like standardizing your language. So we write it this way. This is how we choose to write it. This will be 2 words instead of 1, that sort of thing. Modernizing the language. Do you have words for all the different things that are out there? Can you talk about how electricity works in the language? And if not, you might have to figure that out. Status has to do with sort of the social standing of the language, and it's a complicated thing, but do you see the language around? Do people perceive speakers of the language as inferior for some reason? Are people scared of it? Do people say that's the devil's language? All that stuff has to do with status. And then prestige is related to that, which is sort of like, is this an important thing to people? And right now I'd probably say no. And that's a hard truth, but you have to come to grips with that in order to change it. Because if it was important, there would be more than a handful of people who are trying to turn the tide. And I think there will be, but it's something where that you have to sort of work on these 2 things. So all of this, and we'll get to the other stuff and specifics, but these are some things that I want us to also be thinking about. So sometimes we're not just talking about just making some things, we're stepping out and trying to see what's the big picture. And part of that is connecting yourself with other language programs and sometimes doing a bit of study in terms of social critical theory, sometimes linguistics, And, you know, sometimes it's challenging stuff to read, but it's important to engage in these dialogues, because if you really wanted to bring your language back to a place of everyday use and of strength, you got to transform an entire group of people. And that's a huge task. Not to say it can't be done, but, you know, it's more than just teaching people some words and ways of saying things. Okay, we're out of time. Thanks, everybody. Y'all are awesome. Have a great weekend. Remember, we got 2 chapters to read by Monday. And we'll check in on Monday too, just see how everyone's feeling, doing, how the class is going. You want to do something a little different, you'll have some options. Maybe. Take care.
teman lagi king.
Goodness, cheese.
Sheesh.
Cheese.
Dogden, see you.
Dogden. All right. Dogden.